Shalom, my dear friends, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. In this video, we'll be in chapter 44 of the book of Genesis. As we usually do, we'll start out this video by providing a little bit of background for the book of Genesis, looking at some maps and charts and references and things like that. What I usually do at this point, I will do again for this video, and that is to encourage those of you who are only interested in the verse-by-verse study of this chapter of the Bible to go ahead and fast forward the video through the background material until you come to the Bible software, and that's where we will meet you as we venture forth into our background PowerPoint material. I have been advertising this book. It's my most recently published book. It's called Nazarene-Essene Theology. It is a systematic theology of the Nazarene and Essene sects of Judaism in the Second Temple era. It is drawn almost 100% from the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments, but we do make some references to historical materials and particularly the Dead Sea Scrolls to have some deeper insight into the beliefs, particularly of the Essene sect, which is associated with Qumran, the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And the Dead Sea Scrolls give us great insight into a biblical theology. The reason I'm advertising this book for this video series is because there's a lot of space in this book dedicated to interpretations from the book of Genesis, and it covers a broad variety of topics. It's not a verse-by-verse interpretation, but it does address a lot of topics that come up in the book of Genesis. Best place to purchase my books if you're interested is through Amazon. I think they're available through some other book sellers as well, but Amazon is the best place to get my books. We've also been looking at a series of charts of the Old and New Testaments by Alfred Eade, the theologian, and I believe he was also the artist who did these charts. And we are in the fifth study in that book of charts. This is called the Age of Promise. It's the fourth dispensation. A dispensation is like a period of stewardship, usually a historical period of stewardship, where God deals with man, sometimes in unique ways. So this is the period of time also known as the period of the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and then the 12 sons of Yaakov, who eventually became the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. So between the left-hand side of this chart and the right-hand side of this chart, the family of God, the chosen people of God, grew from one individual and his wife to a family that was the size of a nation. The red ribbon of salvation runs through all three of the patriarchs, but when it comes to the sons of Yaakov, whose name was changed to Israel, then the red ribbon goes through the tribe of Judah, because the Messiah was from the tribe of Judah. In the last number of chapters, from I think it's chapter 37 to the end of the book, the main character of the book is Yosef. These 12 brothers are not listed in birth order. Some of them are, but Joseph was the second to last born, and he's the kind of the main character. Judah is the tribe from which the kings of Israel came, and Levi is the tribes from which the chief priests and their associates, the Levites, came. The only significance that I know of to the tribe of Joseph, and actually it became two tribes. Joseph's sons were Ephraim and Manasseh. Those are the names of the two tribes that represent Joseph when the tribes are listed later in the scriptures. But Joseph seems to be a type in many ways of the Messiah himself. So the events of his life and his character are certainly noteworthy and important for us to give us kind of an example of a godly life. But also a lot of the events of his life are kind of indicative in a figurative or spiritual or symbolic sense of the life of the Messiah. So we get a lot of insight into the life of Jesus, whose Hebrew name was Yeshua, through the story of Joseph. And many chapters are devoted to the life of Yosef, because I think God wants us to learn to know his son, even in the book of Genesis. So that's the period of time that we have been looking at. We have had a couple of maps. I've left this one on the PowerPoint because it shows in a pretty graphic way the boundaries of the promised land. Genesis 13 and Genesis 15 kind of define the boundaries of the promised land as being from the river of Egypt, which I take to be the Nile River, on the left side of the screen. That would be the west. And then in the north and in the east, it's the great river Euphrates, which is kind of outlined by the travels of Abraham. So that is the extent of the promised land. It has never been completely occupied in history and even to this day. The modern state of Israel covers only a very small portion of this promised land that I'm kind of outlining with my pointer here. So I think this land will be occupied in the Messianic kingdom, which is to come. It's still future to us. We also have kind of a diagram of the family tree of Abraham, starting with his father Terah. One of the promises that God made to Abraham was that he would be the father of many nations. We think of him mainly as the patriarch of the Israelites, the main characters in the Bible, but he's also the father of the Ishmaelites and the Edomites through Esau, his grandson. And then also from the branch of the family tree of Lot, who accompanied Avram in his pilgrimage in the Promised Land, come the Moabites and the Ammonites. So all those nations. What is not indicated on this chart is Abraham's second marriage to Keturah and the children that were born to him from them. So there are even additional families, kingdoms represented, kings and kingdoms, nations. We have the what should I say, the four mates of Yaakov when he spent time up in modern day Syria. Then it was called Padan Aram. He had two, I'm going to call them like first level wives, Leah and Rachel. Rachel was his beloved, his first choice. And then each one of these girls had a servant girl that was that accompanied them in their marriage. And both of them also bore children to Yaakov. So here are the 12 sons of Yaakov. And then there was one daughter that I've written into this diagram. Her name was Dinah, and she was a main character in an earlier chapter that we studied. This is a map that scopes out the journeys of Yosef. The purple lines when he was kind of looking for his brothers, searching for his brothers, and then the green line when he is sold into slavery in Egypt. And then the red line indicates the travels back and forth from Canaan to Egypt of Joseph's brothers. Of course, Joseph was there on a permanent basis. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint at this point, and when we get to the fifth verse of chapter 44, we will come back to this to analyze an important subject in this chapter. It's actually kind of a trivial subject, but it's interesting, and it's something that has baffled theologians for ages. So we will talk about that in some detail when we get to verse 5. We will start in Genesis 44, verse 1, and the text I'm reading from is the New King James Version. with some Strong's lexical information about the original Hebrew language. And I've even got of course, I've got the Hebrew text here and the Greek Septuagint text. And then I also have a window for a Dake's study Bible, the Annotated Reference Bible by Finest Dake, which is my favorite study Bible. It's people seem to either love it or hate it, but I like it because it has a lot of original language information in there, as we may see as we study through this chapter today. But I think it's sound theologically also. It is controversial, though. So let's go ahead with Genesis 44:1. And he commanded the steward of his house, the he would be Joseph. He commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food. That's the grain they came to buy, as much as they can carry. So fill those sacks to the top. And put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Now, it seems to me that the mouth of the sack would be the opening. It's pay in Hebrew, which is the Hebrew word for a mouth. But I think as kind of an extended meaning of that word or a related meaning of that word, it would talk about an opening, like any kind of opening, like a grain sack. So each man's money was to be put in the mouth of his sack. And this is ironic because in their first trip to Egypt to buy grain, they were able to buy grain and return to Canaan. But Joseph or someone in Egypt had arranged to have the money that was supposed to pay for that grain replaced in their money or in their grain sacks. And this was a topic of this was an incident that caused kind of great mental agony by the brothers when they were surprised to find that their money was there. Of course, on their second trip, they brought that money back with additional money to pay for more grain. So they had already been accused of being spies, so having ulterior motives for their journey to Egypt. So bringing that first parcel of money back to Egypt would hopefully prove that they were not dishonest men. Joseph continues by saying, also put my cup. Givi is like a bowl. I would call it like a chalice. Maybe, I'm not sure. Even the King James Version, I think, uses a silver cup. It's not the ordinary word for a cup, which is kos. So put the silver, maybe goblet or chalice in the mouth of the sack of the youngest. That would be Benjamin and his grain money. So he did, the steward did, according to the word that Yosef had spoken. Verse 3, as soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. Now, the night before, they had had a great feast at Joseph's home, and some strange things happened that might have given them the impression that Joseph knew who they were, and he did know who they were. They didn't recognize him, though. And we talked about some of the variety of reasons why they might not have recognized him. It had been many years, 13 years, since they had seen him previously. He was probably dressed like an Egyptian. Many reasons that they might not have recognized him, but they didn't. They didn't recognize him as their brother. So that night, Yosef makes certain that they get all the grain they came to buy, that they get their money back in their sacks, and this cup is hidden away in Benjamin's sack. So they get up in the morning and they went their way to return to Canaan. Verse 4, when they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Yosef said to his steward, get up and follow the men, and when you overtake them, say, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks? Now, some of the English versions supply the word cup instead of the supplied the one here. It's not in the Hebrew text. The word cup is not in the Hebrew text, but a referent to what is being discussed there and is left out of the text is the word shetah, which means to drink. And of course, that appears in the English text. So, we're pretty certain that the one, is a reference to this cup. So the Lord drinks from it. Lord, with a capital L, being a reference to Joseph, kind of a human lord, a human boss. At this point in the story, Joseph is the second most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. And he's won Pharaoh's confidence. Some people have called Joseph the prime minister of Egypt. That might be kind of accurate. So he drinks from this cup, and with which he practices divination. And then the steward goes on to say, you have done evil in so doing. So let's continue on for a couple of verses here, but then we'll come back to verse 5 to talk about the subject of divination. Verse 6, so he overtook them and he spoke to them these same words. And let's see, I guess that's where we'll stop. We'll go back to verse 5 here, and then pick it up at verse 7 when we continue. The word divination is an interesting word. It is the Hebrew word nachash, which is the Hebrew word for a serpent, for a snake, for the color bronze or copper, kind of a reddish colored metal. It is the Hebrew word for hissing, like the sound that a snake might make if snakes hiss. I don't know. The serpent is sometimes translated as a dragon. So Nachash is the word, is one of the biblical words, the Hebrew words, that's used to refer to Satan. He is the Nachash. In the Garden of Eden, the Nachash was the most subtle and kind of crafty being there in the Garden of Eden. And it's probably a reference to the serpent, like the created serpent that was in the garden. But there is, in that text, there's the law of dual reference. So the Bible speaks of this serpent, which is a created being, created by God. But it also refers to the fallen angel who was formerly named Lucifer until he fell from grace, and his name was changed, or maybe it wasn't changed. He from that point on, he's referred to as Satan or Satan, which means the accuser or the adversary. Now, I'm giving you all these definitions of Nachash because in every one of these definitions that I've given so far, the meaning is evil. The meaning is wicked, something that is forbidden by God. And there is one additional definition that I want to give you here. And this all the other definitions I've given you so far are nouns. This definition is a verb, so it's a verbal form of the three-letter root, nachash, which means a serpent. But when used as a verb, particularly in the PL category of nouns, it means to practice divination, which is helpful. And obviously the context of chapter 44 here, verse 5 and a few other verses that relate to this, we understand rightly that it's the verbal definition, the practicing of divination. So that's what I want to discuss a little bit, because the question about divination and whether or not Joseph practiced it while he was in Egypt is a subject that has baffled the commentators. So let me go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint again, and we will continue this discussion by looking at some scripture and some possible answers to this question of whether or not Joseph practiced divination. Now, before I made this video, I made a careful study of all of the commentaries that I have at my disposal. And I think it's the main ones. It's the go-to commentaries that are commonly used by Bible scholars. And the variety of answers that I got was very interesting and surprising. And the thing that I learned from that is nobody really knows exactly what divination is or whether or not Joseph practiced it. So, first of all, let's look at some scripture passages that address this topic of practicing divination. And we will see that in all of these scripture references, it is condemned in scripture. But note also that all these citations come after the life of Yosef. We've got two from the law of Moses and some later from the age of the kings and the prophets of Israel. But the law of Moses comes after the Exodus, and Joseph lived before the Exodus. So there was no there was no written law, there was no objective law that was available to people to let them know whether this practice of divination, whatever it was a good thing or a bad thing. So keep that in mind as we go through these. From Leviticus chapter 19, verse 26, the law of Moses says, "You shall not eat anything with blood, nor shall you practice divination." And here's our Hebrew word, nachash. Practicing divination or soothsaying. Soothsaying may be another area of forbidden practice, or it may be kind of an explanatory use of the same thing. But here in the law of Moses, practicing divination is forbidden. Then Deuteronomy 18:10, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughters pass through the fire. That is referring to human sacrifice in religious offerings, offering human beings, live human beings in the fires of burnt offerings and so forth. Or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, which we came across in the earlier verse, or one who interprets omens. Interpreting omens is the Hebrew term nachash. So practicing divination, we could say, means to interpret omens. Well, what are omens? Well, let me talk to you a little about the historical things that we have discovered about the practice of divination and why they are associated with a cup. You would normally think that it's a cup of wine, but frequently the cup was filled with water. And then various things like wax or precious stones or something like that would be put in the cup. And I guess the wave patterns or the reaction of the objects that were inserted into the cup would evidently produce, some kind of prediction. And that's really what an omen means. It's talking about a prediction. So one who interprets omens or makes predictions, we could say, is what divination means. And the implication here is that these interpretations would have to come from a source outside of a human being, because by nature, a human being is not able to predict the future other than by just kind of calculating by, what might normally be expected to occur after a sequence of events, just as a result of human experience. So interpretations of kind of unknowable things by normal, natural human beings by a source outside of that person. And of course, that the source outside of that person could be a holy and divine person, like one of the persons of the Trinity, or it could be an evil spiritual being like Satan or a fallen angel or demons. These creatures could be the source of the interpretation of omens. And because it could come from two different sources, I think that's probably the reason that God forbid these kinds of practices. And then the additional practice that's forbidden is that of a sorcerer or a magician. And I think this would also include things like of what mind-altering drugs and things like that, and casting spells and so forth. Then in 2 Kings 21:6, there's a discussion of, I think this is King Manasseh. I'm sure it is in Chronicles 33. I think it's 2 Kings 21. This is talking about Manasseh. And this is not the grandson of Jacob. This is a king that served, hundreds and hundreds of years later. Also, he, Manasseh, made his son pass through fire. So that's what's forbidden in Deuteronomy 18. He practiced soothsaying, which where did we encounter that already? Maybe we have, oh, yes, in Leviticus 19. He used witchcraft, and here the word witchcraft is the interpretation, the rendering of Nachash. So what do we have? Practicing divination, interpreting omens, and witchcraft. So what is witchcraft? It's spells, it's sorcery, it's things like that. And he consulted spiritists, which would be like fortune tellers and things like that, and also mediums. A medium is usually somebody who tries to make a connection with a living earthly person and someone who has departed this life through death. So to, talk to your dearly beloved loved ones who have gone before you to their eternal reward. That practice is condemned in the scriptures. Then in 2 Chronicles 33:6, also he, Manasseh, caused his sons to pass through the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom. The valley of Ben Hinnom is the valley that ran to the south of the city of Jerusalem in the days of King David and beyond. It was also called just the valley of Hinnom, Gay Hinnom. Gay is the Hebrew word for valley, and Hinnom is this guy's name, whom the valley was, and that's where we get the word Gehenna, which is just kind of a transliteration of a Hebrew term into English. It's where the trash and garbage fires from the city of Jerusalem were constantly in a state of burning, just fires that always had garbage and trash to consume, so they never went out. They were constantly burning. And the Jews felt like that was a appropriate image of what hell is going to be like, because most of the biblical descriptions of hell involve fire that doesn't go out. So witchcraft, interpreting omens, and divination. One of the sources that I looked at is the Fire Bible, and that is it's kind of a denominational study Bible from the Assemblies of God. It's very good. It's a good, very conservative Bible. Probably my second favorite study Bible. And they took kind of a unique approach to this for reasons that I'll explain in a few minutes. In that passage, I think it was verse 5 or later, maybe verse 6, where the steward who chased down Joseph's brothers, once the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, said, "Did you not think that I," and that's a reference to Joseph, "would notice?" The other translations, like the New King James that we read, translate that with, "Did you not think, did you not know that I practice divination, or that I would know that you've taken my cup by my powers of divination?" Which is a very unique translation. So the words "would notice" is how the Fire Bible, actually not the Fire Bible. The Fire Bible, well, it's available in a number of translations, but most of them translate that, "Didn't you know that I am able to do divination or practice divination," to translate Nachash. The commentary or the notes in the Fire Bible say that what the text says could mean, did you not think that I would notice, is how Nachash is translated just in their notes, not in the text of that Bible. So I hope you're as confused as I am about just exactly what divination is and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Although I have a tendency to lean in the direction that it's a bad thing. So let's go through some possibilities that might answer this question. Did Joseph practice divination? Something that was forbidden in the law of Moses, which came after Joseph, and also in the days of the kings and prophets. So the first answer to the question, first possibility that we have before us is that he did practice divination, and it was a sin, and that proves that Joseph was not morally perfect. And he's not morally perfect. No person in the Bible was ever saved by their moral righteousness. Everybody in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, who gets saved is saved by their faith in the God who promised that he would send the Messiah to die on the cross and to rise again in the resurrection and grant completely out of his grace a status of righteousness which is not earned, but is actually God's own righteousness, which he gifts to believers. That is, theologically, that's called the doctrine of justification by grace through faith, especially Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. So Joseph, nor any other Bible character, was morally perfect. So he may have been doing something that was later condemned as a sin. He might have known that it was a sin just because of his relationship with God and the personal revelations that God gave to him. Or he may not have known. So this possibility is that he did practice divination and he used that cup to do it. The second possibility is that he did practice divination, but it wasn't a sin because the law of Moses had not yet been given. There's a place in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul talks about the fact that God doesn't credit a sin or count a sin against a person unless there is a law, an objective law, like a biblical statement that condemns it. I mean, the wages of sin was still death up until the time the law of Moses was given. That's a period of about 2,500 years where death reigned because of sin, but God didn't condemn people or he didn't assign crimes to people before the law of Moses was given. It's the reason everybody died, prior to, ever since the Garden of Eden. Sin is the reason that people die physically. So that's one possibility, that because it wasn't, written in this, the scriptures weren't written yet. And Joseph may have, although it was later condemned as a sin, he may have been clear in God's eyes because the law hadn't been written down that forbade that. Okay, he didn't do it. This is another option. He didn't do divination, but he wanted his brothers to think that he did, to test them. And there's no question that he was testing them by putting his cup in their sacks when they started their journey towards home. But by doing this, even if he wasn't practicing divination and was free and clear as far as that's concerned, then he deceived his brothers. So he may not have practiced divination, but he practiced deception, and that's a sin. So whether he did or he didn't, it looks like Joseph could have, been guilty of either deception or practicing divination. Here's another option. He pretended to practice divination so the Egyptians would think that he had a superpower. And that would give them what? It would give Joseph more credibility in the sight of Egyptians. And this divination using cups and other objects and things like that was a common practice in Egypt. So if Joseph was practicing it, he wasn't the only Egyptian who was doing it. So he pretended to do so. But even if he pretended to do that to make the Egyptians more submissive to his his commands and his orders in the name of Pharaoh, again, that's practicing deception, and that's not complete honesty like God requires. Here's another option. And I kind of like this. I kind of like this one. Interpreting dreams, as we know Joseph has done on several occasions already in his young life. Dreams that he had that he revealed to his family members, dreams that he had about the butcher and the baker and how he interpreted those, which determined the destiny of those two guys, and then the dream of Pharaoh that he interpreted. So interpreting dreams could be defined as divination, an ability to know unknowable things, but in Joseph's case, it was by God's revelation. So at least in English, the word divination, usually in English, has a bad, immoral connotation. It's the things that witches do and people who practice Satanism and things that are commonly morally forbidden in a society. Not much of that stuff is forbidden in our modern society. But one of the understandings about divination is that it is receiving information from a source beyond mere mortal capabilities. So it is the ability to know divinely revealed things. And my last note here is that I am the possessor of a Master of Divinity degree. Just about anybody who goes to a theological seminary these days. It was a 4-year program for me. I think it's, more or less in different institutions, but I have a 4-year Master of Divinity degree. And that doesn't mean that I'm a master of practicing divination or sorcery or interpreting omens. But it does mean that I have studied and have a good scholarly grasp of divine things. The one true God is a divine being. So really, this is the only one that kind of gets Joseph off the hook, is that what he appeared to be doing was the practice of divination because he knew unknowable things from a source beyond himself. But if he was getting this information of God, from God, which he claims to do when he's called upon to interpret dreams, he says, God has the interpretation of dreams, but I'll pray about it and see if he will give me the interpretation. And because I like Joseph, that's the interpretation I'm going to apply to this question from Genesis 44 about whether or not Joseph practiced divination. I'm going to say he practiced receiving and interpretations of dreams and other things from the one true God. So he's still a holy guy. So yeah, indeed, he practices divination. These are the steward's words, not Joseph's own words. But Joseph was the one who commanded him to say these things. So then we left off, we read verse 6. So he overtook them, the steward did, and he spoke to them these same words that Joseph had instructed him to do. And they said, why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such things. So they don't yet know that the cup is in their sacks. In fact, they're so confident that it's not, because they are honest men, that they're going to make some kind of bold claims here, which they probably shouldn't make. Look, the brothers say, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house, from Joseph's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, this cup is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. So that's the confidence that the brothers have. It's actually a very stupid thing for them to say when we discover that the cup is in Benjamin's sack. What the brothers are saying, well, then Benjamin should die, and the rest of us will be slaves in Egypt, because they are so confident that the money, first of all, the money that they brought down on their second trip, they're confident that's not in their sacks, even though it was on the first trip. And they're also confident that the cup is not in any of their sacks. Now he said, the steward said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall, the rest of you shall be blameless. And that is not what they said. They said, whoever has the cup, that person should die, and the rest of us should be slaves. The steward says, whoever has the cup will be my slave, Joseph's slave, and you shall be blameless. The rest of you will be blameless, even if money is found in your sack. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. And so he searched. He began with the oldest and left off at the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. So he's searched out everybody's sack. Nothing is said about finding the money in those sacks. I guess this is all about the cup. And the cup was found in the last sack. Now, as the steward is searching through the older brother's sacks, probably the brothers are getting more and more confident that nothing is going to be found there. So they probably about had a heart attack when the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. Tearing one's clothes is a kind of a Hebrew idiomatic way of expressing grief or regret or, woe is me, very negative stuff. It's a way of expressing negative stuff. If a person blasphemes, then the righteous people tear their clothes. If a person dies, the mourners will tear their clothes. So a lot of clothes got torn in those days. And they loaded their donkey and returned to the city. This is the city in Egypt. They're going back to Joseph. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and Joseph, was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? This kind of argues against my theory that interpreting dreams is divination, but Joseph may have interpreted Nachash as interpreting dreams, and that it was okay because his interpretations were coming from God. So in that case, it didn't have anything to do with this cup. He was interpreting dreams before he ever got to Egypt. So also keep in mind that Joseph set this whole thing up, and it is a test of his brothers. So now he's got them in a tight spot, and their reaction to what has happened is going to be key in Joseph's understanding of what kind of character his brothers have. Like, have they learned anything since they sold him into slavery? So, the reference to practicing divination may be a reference to the common Egyptian practice of doing that, not necessarily such a man as I can certainly practice divination. It doesn't mean that he was practicing it. I think he only interpreted his dreams based on God's interpretations. Okay, verse 16. Then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? In other words, they were caught red-handed. The cup was in Benjamin's sack. Who can deny? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my lord's slaves. Um, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. So this is a combination of the brothers boasting and the steward's kind of pronouncement about what would happen. Uh, but Judah and his brothers are offering themselves to Joseph as slaves. And according to the brothers' proposal, Benjamin should die and they should all be slaves. The steward said, only Benjamin will be a slave, and the rest of you will be free because the cup wasn't found in your sacks. Both we and whom, and he also with whom the cup was found. So, like I say, this is kind of compromise between the two proposals. Everybody's a slave, but apparently nobody dies. But he said, let's see. Yeah, this is Joseph's response. But he, Joseph, said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father." So that's what the steward had proposed. That's what Joseph agrees on at this point. So what did he hear from his brothers as far as his expectations of them? Verse 18. Then Yehuda came near to him, to Yosef, and said, "O my lord, please let your servant speak a word in my lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant. For you are even like Pharaoh." And that's accurate. He's the number two under Pharaoh's ultimate rule. Verse 19, Judah continues, "My lord asked his servants, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young." Who is that? That's Benjamin. "His brother is dead." Who's Benjamin's brother? Yosef. They think he's dead, or as good as dead. All they know is they sold Joseph into slavery and didn't realize they were speaking to him in that moment. So who is his brother is dead, Yosef is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children. The only two children that Rachel had were Yosef and Benjamin, and she died in childbirth with Benjamin. And he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, like in the first conversation we had with you about this situation, we said the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die, like of a broken heart of grief over losing his two favorite sons. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So the only hope they had of getting more grain and of freeing their one brother, who was it that was kept in prison? Was that Shimon that was kept in prison? They had to bring Benjamin down. So it was when we went to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And Lord here is spelled with a small l. So that's just it's an address of respect. No hint of divinity here or anything like that. "And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother is, we cannot go down, semicolon. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down, semicolon. For we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me two sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces." At least that was the story that the brothers gave to Yaakov. They knew he wasn't torn to pieces, but they got some animal blood on Joseph's coat of many colors, or his long sleeve coat. And so that was the conclusion that Jacob came to. And I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him. So Jacob is saying, if you take Benjamin from me and something bad happens to him, you bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. And we'll talk about the word grave in a few minutes. It's the Hebrew word Sheol, which we talked about in a previous video, chapter 42, but we'll briefly touch on it in this one as well. Verse 30, now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, because they did bring him down, Yaakov let Benjamin go. And now Judah is saying to Joseph, now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. He'll die of a broken heart. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father. In other words, Judas is saying, I offered myself as what? Collateral for Benjamin, taking all responsibility for him. If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear blame before my father forever. And he probably means beyond this life into eternity. Jacob would hold it against him. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. In a way, this is kind of touching, and it's also symbolic, because Judah, Benjamin's brother, is saying, look, according to the agreement that we made, according to the proposal that we made, Benjamin should die. And even though you're not requiring his life, I would like to serve as a substitute for him. I would like to become a slave and let Benjamin go. And this is not Joseph symbolizing the Messiah. This is Judah symbolizing his descendant, the Messiah, who offered himself in the place of all of us who are sinners. So when Jesus died on the cross, he was not dying for his own sins, because he didn't have any. The Bible's clear about that. He who knew no sin became sin for us. So Yeshua offered himself as a substitute for us, take our punishment on himself, so we could go free, so we could be forgiven of our sins. Our sins could be erased, blotted out, and God can consider us righteous, can grant us his own righteousness, the righteousness of Messiah, of Christ, and then walk with us every day through life to work out that righteousness in us and to transform us into legitimately righteous people. I made a reference before about being saved by God's grace through faith. And some people think, well, I believe in Jesus, so I'm saved. I know I'm saved. I'm eternally saved, so I can do anything I want. No sin is ever going to be held against me. And that's contrary to the biblical understanding. In order to be in the presence of God, you have to be righteous. And if God grants us his own righteousness, if he declares us to be righteous, then he can't make us go away from his presence because we're not righteous, when he has declared that we are righteous. But he doesn't just leave it at that. Like I say, he walks through us through every day of our lives with us, and he transforms us. He makes us into holy and righteous people. And I think probably that process is never completely, it's never completed. We will never be morally perfect in this life, but in the resurrection, I believe we will be. So ultimately, God's plan for us is to make us totally and completely moral and righteous people. So that needs to be emphasized. And I'm really touched by the fact that Yehuda is offering himself as a sacrifice, as a substitute for a person who has been found guilty of a crime worthy of death. For verse 34, how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father. So very touching. And that is the end of chapter 44. Now, before we leave this chapter, I want to touch on this subject of Sheol, which in these previous verses is translated with the word grave, and that's unfortunate. So I want to go back to a Bible chart, like a different Bible chart that I shared with you in an earlier video. And this one, like I say, we looked at it in the video for chapter 42. It's from a book of Bible charts by Tim LaHaye and Thomas Ice. And I can't remember the name of the book, but if you look up those authors' names, you'll be able to get these charts. And this is just one of a book, probably hundreds of charts in this book. But I think it's very accurate. And it really shows the realms of creation. Up here at the top, we have the third heaven, which is the place where God lives. Jesus referred to it as the Father's house with many mansions. Then we have the heavenly places, which is this blue area below the third heaven. Some people would call that the first heaven, like the atmosphere around the earth. Possibility. Some people would call it the second heaven, which is the stars and the planets, outer space, and so forth. That's a possibility also. I just think of this as the realm of spiritual beings. Of course, God can exist in this realm. So can holy angels, so can fallen angels. Demons, I suppose, also. I'm not sure about demons. But anyway, the heavenly places here is normally associated with evil powers. And then Satan is kind of the main character of this, and it kind of traces the various attacks that Satan has made on mankind and God's plans for man and for all creation throughout the Bible. But then we have the surface of the earth here. It's in the pink, and that's labeled grave. And the Hebrew word for that is kavar. So that would be kuf, bet, resh, kavar. Kuf, bet, resh. Which would be like a Q, a B, and an R. That is the grave, and the only part of a human being that goes to the grave is the body. The soul and spirit come out of the body and never go into the grave. So that's why I'm making a big deal about this, to talk about Jacob dying and like going to Sheol. That's where his soul and spirit would go at this point in history. And we'll talk a little bit about Sheol, but the only part of Jacob that was going to go to the grave is his body. When you or I die, hopefully you are a believer with me in Yeshua. And when we die, our soul and spirit will come out of our body. And this empty shell that we used to occupy will be put in the grave, or it'll be cremated or buried at sea or disposed of, hopefully in some respectful manner, and await the resurrection, where the body that was buried is and is not. It's related to, probably has the same DNA as the resurrection body, but it will be so different, and it will have different capabilities and different features and things like that. So the body rests in the grave awaiting the resurrection. Now, when I say it awaits, that's kind of a misnomer, because your body like doesn't have any conscious existence. That's your soul and spirit. Now, in the Old Testament days, when the soul and spirit came out of a body, they went to Sheol. But you can see that Sheol is divided up into different compartments. One is Tartarus. And this is a term, I think it's used in 2 Peter 2, 4 through 10. I don't believe Tartarus is used in Jude, but Jude 6 and 7 is talking about the same place. And that is the prison of fallen angels, particularly those who intermarried with human women in Genesis 6, just prior to the flood of Noah's Ark. And this is a unique group of angels that are even now, since Genesis 6, are confined to this place. Other fallen angels are on the loose, but these are like confined to this place. There's also the lake of fire here. And as far as I know, there's nobody in the lake of fire now. Eventually, the Antichrist will be there. Eventually, the Satan and the false prophet will be there. All be there. And I think every unbelieving person will go to the lake of fire. But in the Old Testament days, when anybody died, their soul and spirit went to Sheol, even the believers. So believers and unbelievers went to Sheol. And in the middle here, we see three compartments. One of them is called paradise, and that was the realm of the righteous dead. And earlier I referred to Luke chapter 16, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, which is very enlightening about Sheol, about the afterlife. And the poor beggar who had nothing in this life, but was a believer, he went to paradise. And Abraham was there, and those two were talking and everything. The rich man who had everything in this life but had nothing for eternal life was an unbeliever, and he went to hell. I call it torments because the rich man said, "Here I am in torment in this place with fire and stuff like that." We referred to Gehenna before as the valley of fire, the garbage fires and stuff like that. And that was the destination of the wicked dead. Now, eventually, all the people who are in hell are going to be emptied out of there and sent to the lake of fire, the eternal destination. But in the meantime, and I'm talking about Old Testament days, there were these two compartments, and they were separated by a great gulf, which other places in the Bible talk about as the bottomless pit. So you couldn't cross over from here to there. I don't know why anybody would want to. Everybody from here would like to cross over there, but they can't either. And so a dialogue goes on between the rich man and Lazarus and Abraham. And they couldn't have that conversation unless they were in close proximity to each other, but just able to speak across the great gulf, which you couldn't cross from one side to the other. Okay, now, when Jesus dies on the cross, here's the cross. One thing that is not illustrated on this chart, and I think really should be, is what is called the descent into hell. And so when Jesus was dying on the cross, one of the criminals who was crucified with him said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And that leads us to believe that he was a believer. And Jesus, Yeshua's answer to him was, "Today, on this day of our deaths, you will be with me in paradise." Now, when we think of paradise, we think of the Garden of Eden, or we think of the Father's house with many mansions. But here is paradise in the underworld, the place where Lazarus was, the place where Abraham, Father Abraham, was. That is where Yeshua descended to. He descended to paradise, the realm of the righteous dead. And he led them out of there up into the third heaven. So now in the New Testament era, when people die, and when I say New Testament era, I mean after Jesus' death on the cross and his descent into hell. The descent into hell is in the Apostles' Creed, but it's very biblical. There's plenty of scriptural evidence for that. Now, when believers die, their body does go to the grave, but their soul and spirit go to the third heaven, the place where God lives. And in John 14, where Jesus uses that term, the Father's house with many mansions. He says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'll come back and I'll take you to be with me where I am. And that place is the third heaven. Now, in 2 Corinthians 12, the Apostle Paul talks about visiting this place, that he was caught up to heaven. He doesn't know whether he was in his body or out of his body, but he visited the third heaven, and he calls it the third heaven, but he also calls it paradise. So paradise is no longer here in Sheol. It's up here in the third heaven. So you and I, in this age, if we're believers, we don't go to the underworld. We don't go to Sheol. This is not the Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory. I guess the way I should say that is I don't believe there is a thing called purgatory. When you die and your soul and spirit come out, you go directly to the third heaven. You do not pass go. You do not collect $200. You don't go to limbo or purgatory or any other place. The scripture is very clear that, one instant we're on the earth, the next instant we are in the third heaven, the Father's house with many mansions. The other thing I wanted to mention is we know that Yeshua descended into hell to lead the captive believers out of Sheol, out of the underworld into the third heaven. But he also went to proclaim victory to the lost. He may have gone here to torments and made that proclamation. I think he went here to these fallen angels to declare to them, you know, that thing about the Nephilim and fallen angels intermarrying with human women, that didn't work. The Messiah did come into the world, and here I am. And, your plans didn't work out, so you can spend eternity regretting that. Now, whether these angels ultimately end up in the lake of fire, I think probably they do. So I think this is a temporary holding place. I think this was definitely a temporary holding place. There are probably still people here waiting for the great white throne judgment, which I think would be probably not the judgment. No, the millennial kingdom of Christ. The great white throne judgment comes after that. So it shows these people standing before the great white throne. It's not labeled on the chart, but that's where it would come at the end of the millennium. And then they are sent here to the lake of fire. So I think these people go to the lake of fire. I assume these people do too, the fallen angels in Tartarus. But there's nothing on the chart to indicate that. So that's all I wanted to say about that. When you see the Hebrew word Sheol, and you got to know a little Hebrew, or you've got to have these lexical aids that you can, refer to so you can know what the Hebrew word is. When you see that translated as grave, then unfortunately that is wrong. So that brings us to the end of chapter 44. And I will end today with the priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6. I'm just going to give it to you in English today. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. I hope we'll see you next time for Genesis 45.